Hello and welcome. I hope you're all doing great. And in this short video, we'll be looking at how to create this really cool turntable animation. So instead of having that kind of traditional uh, turntable animation where you have the camera just going around whatever you're trying to present, you can just add in some rotation in the other axis to just make a more interesting presentation. And it can be really useful if whatever you're presenting has, like for example, in this previous tutorial, you can see how on there's stuff happening on the top surface and there's stuff happening on the bottom surface. So it can be a really interesting way of presenting whatever is happening from all angles, from the top, from the sides, and from the bottom. So let's just look at how to set that up in Blender. So we'll use this default scene with the Blender default cube and everything. And the first thing I like to do, I'll just hit 1 on the numpad to go to the front view, and just hit Control, Alt, and 0. And this just snaps the camera to your current view in the viewport, just like that. And then I'll select the camera, move it upwards in the Z-axis so that I can just see the grid flow. And then also select the cube and move it in the Z-axis while holding Control, and this just moves it in increments, and it makes it easier to just snap it to the floor of the 3D world. Okay, so with that set up, I'm just going to add an empty in the center of the scene where the cube is. And I like to use the single arrow, and then I'll just scale it up, just like that. And if you want to create that kind of traditional turntable where it's just going around, this can be a really way to set that up real quick. I'll just parent the camera to that empty, hit Control P, and that's it. So with the camera parented to the empty, you can see if I just rotate it now in the Z-axis, the camera just follows along, and you can see how that looks like from the perspective of the camera. So if that's what you wanted to learn, that's it. You can close the video and go do some other stuff. Okay, but so then I'll move to the animation workspace, and I like to work with the graph editor on the left. Okay, so let's do that first. Actually, let's just animate the rotation in the Z-axis. So with the empty selected, I'll just go to frame number 0, and this is really important. I'll go to frame 0, place a keyframe right there, and then I'll go to the last frame, which is frame 250, and then rotate the empty by 360 degrees and place another keyframe right there. And you will notice that I placed the first keyframe at frame 0, but the animation actually starts at frame 1. And this is important because frame 0 and at 0 degrees and at 360 degrees, the camera is in the exact same position in 3D space. So if you made your animation included both the first frame and the last frame in that animation, when it's transitioning from the last frame and looping back around, you'll notice a stutter because that frame will be repeating. So you can either start from frame 1 to the last frame, or if you want to start at frame 0, you can start your animation at frame 0 and exclude this last frame, and that will just make the animation loop seamlessly. Okay, so if I play the animation, you'll notice that it begins sort of slow and speeds up, and then towards the end it also slows down, and that's not what we want. And this is because of the interpolation of the curves in the graph editor. So in the graph editor, I'll just hit T and set it to linear, and that just makes it so that it's moving at a constant speed, and when it loops back around, you won't notice any transition. Okay, so with that done, we have that kind of traditional turntable animation. But we can just push it a little bit further to make it look more interesting. by playing around with the other axes, so like the x-axis and the y-axis of the same empty. So while it's playing, if I play around with the x-axis, you'll see how that happens. The camera is still rotating around in the z-axis, and it just looks kind of cool, and you can see your object in from different angles as it rotates. And in the 3D viewport, you can just see what's happening to the camera if I play around with that. And also, if playing around with the y-axis, you can see what it does, which is really cool. And even both of them at the same time. So just really, really cool to see your object from all angles. So, and the cool thing about this is, so let's just set, let's say animate the y-axis. So I'll just go to frame 0, place a keyframe, and then go to the last frame, set that to 360, place a keyframe, set the interpolation to linear, and then you can see what happens. And the cool thing about this is that you don't have to restrict yourself to rotating once, as in 360 degrees. So for example, I'll just select one of the, on the last keyframe towards the end, I can set this to maybe, and you can also use math in this field. So if say you want, by the time the z-axis has rotated once, you want the x-axis to rotate maybe 3 times. So you can just say 360 multiplied by 3 and set your keyframe right there, and you'll see what happens in the curve editor. And if you play this animation, you'll see that by the time it's rotated once in the z-axis, in the x-axis it will have rotated 3 times, which is really cool. So you can play around with all these settings, create these variation in the different axes, and it just gives you a sort of more interesting presentation. So I'll go to the y-axis, set a keyframe right there, and in the last frame, say 360 multiplied by 2, set a keyframe, and you'll see how the animation looks, which is really cool. So here it's happening kind of fast, but you get the idea of what's happening and the kind of stuff you can do with this. So really cool. I hope it's useful. I hope you learned something from it, and I will see you in the next one.